everyone, and thank you so much for tuning into Facilities in Focus. It's always a joy to be a part of your journey on the internet. In case you forgot, my name is Mackenna Moralez, and I am the managing editor with FacilitiesNet and the host of this very podcast. I'm sure longtime readers of FacilitiesNet and attendees of NFMT know her, but today I am joined by Joan Stein. Joan is the president of Stein Consulting, a Pittsburgh-based Americans with Disabilities Act consulting firm. Joan is nationally recognized as an ADA expert and has provided services to more than 500 organizations across the United States. But thank you so much for joining me today, Joan. How are you?
I'm terrific, McKenna. Thank you so much for having me on.
Good. And I'm just really excited because it's always fun to talk to you. And I feel like I learned so much whenever we speak. And ADA is a popular topic.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Because they're not, I love doing everything that I do with your whole organization because to me, educating people is the single most important thing about ADA.
I agree. I totally agree. But as some of our listeners may know, we are covering all things healthcare this season. And I think when people think about healthcare, they tend to only think about hospitals. But there is so much more in this sector that people realize. We are going to talk a little bit about ADA within senior care facilities.
A quick break to thank our 3 Season 5 sponsors, ABM, Orkin, and PointCore. Here's a quick message from all 3 sponsors. This episode is brought to you by PointCore, delivering facilities and construction solutions for healthcare that help organizations strengthen performance and support exceptional care environments. Pests hate us. Businesses love us. Orkin helps keep your facility ahead of pest pressures with practical, proven protection tailored to your needs. Healthcare facilities are demanding environments. Thankfully, ABM provides peace of mind with IAQ, efficient HVAC, and tech-enabled predictive maintenance. Learn more at abm.com/care. And now we'll get back to the Facilities in Focus podcast.
So can you just explain to me a little bit about what ADA compliance looks like in these types of facilities?
Sure. It's interesting because unfortunately in the healthcare industry, they have always believed, well, we're ADA compliant because we get gurneys in here and we get wheelchairs in here and so forth. And truthfully, in the acute medical situation setting, probably the least compliant area are patient rooms and patient bathrooms in specific. So when you get into the senior care area, they very often provide what a continuum of care that begins with semi-independent or assisted living where people go for congregate meals, but they have their own, individual rooms or apartments. And then as they age and their physical needs increase, they move through the continuum and wind up in either a memory unit if they've developed dementia or Alzheimer's, and then or to a skilled care. And it's very interesting because there are organizations who monitor and license healthcare facilities, the JCHA and all kinds of licensing organizations. But the problem is they don't really address ADA compliance. For a number of years ago, I was working with healthcare, and they said, well, we address ADA in our cultural competence. And I said, what's that?
Well, what does that even mean?
Exactly. And they said, well, our nurses ask questions and they go around the facility and answer questions like, is the room wheelchair accessible? Well, if you don't know what the components of wheelchair accessibility are, how are you going to answer that question? And they don't know what they are. So really, I'm going to give it to you straight and dirty.
Okay.
ADA is a federal law. So, irregardless of whatever licensing entities the healthcare or the senior care organization operates under, even though they really hold the key because they provide the money. You know, if you're not a licensed facility, you can't get Medicaid funding and blah, 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 blah. But the ADA, as a federal law, in many situations, should and will supersede what the licensing entity does. So if the licensing entity is not incorporating the key components, the critical components of ADA compliance, they are falling woefully short. And in doing so, they are leaving themselves open to someone filing an ADA complaint against them, either with the Department of Justice or in federal court in a private lawsuit, which are the two ways that the ADA is enforced. Now, ADA compliance literally starts in the parking lot or the public transit stop at the sidewalk and moving up through the property. And truthfully, the parking lot is the number one priority under the ADA, is getting in. So, and unfortunately, when new facilities are designed and constructed, the design professionals don't always or rarely pay attention to the exterior elements, the parking lot and the curb ramps and so forth. They focus primarily on the buildings, but the parking lots are extremely important because you've got slope issues for the parking spaces, and are there access aisles, are there curb ramps, are there ramps, and so forth. Then getting in the door, you know, many places, and this is a common myth. People believe that automatic door openers are a requirement under the ADA, and they are not.
Yes, you told me that.
Yes,
and
they
I was
are not.
shocked.
Yes. Now, there are some state accessibility requirements, like in Florida and in Washington, D.C., where they do require it, but they are not required under the ADA. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. And when you look in the community, in the business community, you see it all the time. Why? Because it makes it easier for people to get in. Grocery stores and all kinds of buildings do it because it's a smart thing to do. And that power assisted door, when the camera catches your view, it doesn't just work for people with disabilities. It works for moms pushing baby strollers and people with their hands full and so forth. So you've got to get in the door. Now, I've been to a number of senior communities. My sister actually lives in one right now. My parents lived in one for the last 10 years of their lives. So basically, when you come into the common area, it looks good. I mean,
Right.
obviously, they want it to look pretty because they want you to come there. I remember, unfortunately, many, many years ago when my grandparents were in the home, as we called it, you walked in and unfortunately all you smelled was urine. And then you saw people in posy chairs, you know, with restraints and all that. That was last era. You know, I haven't seen anything like that in many, many years, fortunately. But what you see when you walk into these places are plants and couches and all kinds of lively stuff, which is wonderful. But what they have to make sure they're doing is in providing that pleasant atmosphere, that they don't neglect the accessibility. And I have said for many years, I've been doing this for 33 years now. And I have said for many years, good accessibility and good design are not mutually exclusive.
Right.
You can design and construct a beautiful, beautiful facility, and it doesn't have to look like a 1950s, hospital with the elongated sink and the ugly ramp and all that. But what happens too often is that once the design and construction is done, The third, I have three components for ADA compliance. First, you have to design it right. Then you have to construct it right. And then you have to maintain the accessibility.
Exactly.
And unfortunately, what happens is in every part of a facility, when a staff member, it can be a maintenance person, a cleaning person, one of the staff, when they see an empty space, which is intentionally designed and constructed to provide access for people primarily who use wheelchairs, they fill that space. Oh, let's put a garbage can there. Oh, let's put a planter there. Let's put a table there. And what they've done, in essence, is remove the accessibility that was designed and constructed. So educating the staff is critically important, and that can be a very important role for facility managers to play, is letting their staff know that you have to look outside of your silo to see what, so, when the housekeeping person sees paper towels on the floor in the ladies' room at the door because somebody's used a paper towel to grab the handle and they just drop it, so they said, okay, I'm going to put a garbage can there. Well, they put a garbage can in the space that was intended for maneuvering clearance so that somebody in a wheelchair or using a walker can come up beside the door, pull it open and not get hit by the door and leave. So when we're talking about people with mobility issues, that's going to be a large percentage of that population. They're using canes, they're using walkers, they're using wheelchairs, they're using scooters, all kinds of mobility aids and devices that by their very nature and design and use require more space. In addition to that, you have people who, for one reason or another, either lack of experience or, they have a condition that creates spasms or whatever, they run into walls. They scrape up the walls. So, very often you will see in an assisted living facility wider hallways.
Right.
The requirements for accessible routes and ramps and so forth is a minimum of 36 inches wide in between the handrails. And if it's a slope there, if it's a slope run, you have to have handrails on both sides. So the key word there is minimum. Doesn't have to be, and they really, to make their maintenance staff happy, they should make it wider, because then they're not repainting the walls all the time.
Yes.
Same thing with getting through doors. Doors require a minimum clear opening width of 32 inches when the doors open 90 degrees. And I've had contractors for years say, well, I put a 3-foot door in. I said, but that's from frame to frame. You can't walk through or roll through the frame. You have to measure the clear floor space, the clear space that's available to get through the door. So really where the critical areas are, quite honestly, are bathrooms, providing both toileting facilities and bathing facilities, and then congregate meals. The congregate meals issue is easier to address because, first and foremost, it's movable furniture.
Right.
So what they should do is have the interior design people avoid trying to make it look bougie and not use pedestal tables, because pedestal tables obstruct the clear knee and toe space for somebody who uses a wheelchair.
Okay.
Because the floor of the pedestal projects out, and what happens is their wheels or their feet or their knees will bang into the pedestal.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So there are beautiful tables that are standard 4-leg tables, and what they just need to pay attention to is that they get tables that don't exceed 34 inches above the ground to the top of the surface, and that they provide a minimum of 30 inches of clear space under the table in between the legs so that somebody can pull up and literally belly up to the table and be able to eat their meal. So, they usually, in most facilities, they do, two top or four top tables. And, that can be kind of tricky if you have three people sitting at a table in wheelchairs. It can get kind of iffy. So, they need to look at their population and see what kinds of tables make the most sense, because obviously not everybody is cheery and happy and getting along with everybody all the time. And when I go to visit my sister, I'll say, well, why is Joe sitting at it? Well, Joe was like being mean, so they put him at another table. And human management.
Right.
The thing about ADA is the ADA tells you. I have a friend who used to work at the Access Board, and he said, if you want to know what's covered under the ADA, turn the room upside down, and whatever doesn't fall is covered.
Oh.
So, and the reason for that is that the ADA addresses the built environment. It doesn't address specifically, the regulations don't address specifically human behavior. It's kind of like, people cheating and parking in an HP parking space, or somebody who's able-bodied using the accessible stall in the bathroom. Now, the law doesn't address that. That's common sense, that's human behavior, that's being kind, whatever. So, the eating areas are easier to deal with if the facility offers a buffet in any way. That
Right.
poses a specific challenge. One, because the sneeze guards are usually right at the person's head if
Right.
they're in a wheelchair. And if they're pushing a wheelchair, they can't necessarily, hold a plate and wheel themselves. So again, it's up to the staff to augment. Can we tell me what you want? Or my best friend uses a wheelchair, and we'll go to a buffet, and we'll just walk together, and I'll carry her plate, and she'll tell me what she wants, and I'll get it for her. But you have to make sure that it's, at the proper height. And again, that can't be any higher than 36 inches to the top of the surface. And I emphasize top of the surface because very often with contractors, when we talk about grab bars in bathrooms, the range is 33 to 36 inches above the finished floor, AFF, to the top of the gripping surface. Well, they are very used to doing everything to the center line. And I say to them, you can't put your hand through the grab bar. You have to reach the top of the surface. And so unbelievably, almost every single time I measure grab bars, they're 37 inches off the ground because they do it to the center line. So you want to make sure that if there's a buffet line, if there's any kind of self-service, to make sure that things are placed in the reach ranges. So let's say the toughest for last. The toughest for last are their bedrooms or apartments and their bathrooms. Now, there are people who use wheelchairs who very often cannot get in and out of bed unassisted. So, when they were living at home or with family members, they would rely on, a personal care attendant or a family member, and they very often need to be lifted or transferred from the wheelchair to their bed. If the person who is assisting them, and this is very, very often in nursing facilities and senior facilities, they do not lift somebody by themselves. They won't even, if you're lying in a bed and you need to be moved up in the bed, they will get two people and they will grab the pad underneath the person and go 1, 2, 3 and slide them up, because the highest incidence of back injuries are with nursing home staff and senior care staff. So they know that somebody shouldn't do it by themselves. The alternative also are lifts. And the lift, or sling and so forth. But the problem is, and we find this probably more in hotels than we do in senior care facilities, but I hope that if there are senior care facility managers on this podcast and they're ordering things, don't have beds that have a solid base.
Okay.
They need clearance under the bed because the base of the lift goes underneath the bed, so that
Oh.
the vertical part of the lift literally comes up to the side of the bed. This is a huge issue in hotels. Huge, because first of all, they in hotels they make the beds too high. Well, that I can't get. Sometimes I need a step stool to get up onto a hotel bed. So I would assume that they're not making the beds in senior facilities too high. But the other thing is to make sure that it's not solid underneath, that there's clear space underneath the bed to get the lift under there so that it can be used safely by the staff person to get the patient, the resident, into bed. So that's the issue with beds. And again, people like to fill rooms. And I think one of the things that I see very, very often in senior facilities is that when people have downsized from their home or their apartment, there are so many things that they want to keep that gives them memories of their life. And sometimes it's furniture and all kinds of stuff. And what happens with that is that they fill what is ostensibly a small room with big furniture. And that creates a maneuvering issue, that creates a access to and from. So they need to make sure that they don't fill the room up with furniture, that they provide enough clear floor space on one or both sides of the bed, and that they provide a clear path to get to the bathroom and out of the room. Those are critical. So then let's go to the bathroom. Well, let's not, but let's talk about it. Bathrooms, and again, this goes into the area of the regulations for the licensing entities. In some cases, conflict with ADA. ADA says that you must provide facility that somebody can use independently, okay? Which means that there must be sufficient clearance on the side of the toilet for somebody to be able to back in beside the toilet and do a side transfer. And that there must be sufficient clear floor space in front of the toilet if somebody can stand up, grab onto the grab bar, stand up, and pivot around and sit down on the toilet. Too many of their bathrooms are not designed that way. And they say, well, because they're assisted. Well, what if they don't want assistance? What if they, my late father, he was 93 and a half when he died, and he used to he got awakened in the middle of the night having to go to the bathroom, and he forgot he couldn't walk. So he would go to get out of bed and then fall face down on the floor. So, but sometimes he actually made it to the bathroom. I don't know how. And he needed to be able to do it independently. So there are issues that are conflicting. And what they need to be able to do, if they are hiring design professionals, they need to do the due diligence and make sure that that design professional understands the place of the ADA regulations and the place of the licensing regulations, because under ADA, if there is another regulation that provides for a greater degree of accessibility, if it is more stringent than the ADA, it will supersede the ADA. So, and if they have health department issues or other things, life safety issues, life safety is the only thing that will supersede the ADA. from a regulatory standpoint. So if they say, this door has to have a specific weight to it because it's a fire door, okay, that will supersede the maximum 5 pounds of force to open the door.
Right.
So, that they've got to peel back the layers of the onion. But when they're signing the contract with a design professional, the standard contract will comply with all applicable federal, state, and local laws. Well, that's ADA, guys. And
Right.
very often they'll say, oh, well, we follow the building code. Well, it's not a building code. It's a civil rights law. So you got to
Mhm.
pay attention to it.
Right. What are some real world consequences when a facility is not ADA compliant?
Well, number one, a complaint can be filed, both
Mhm.
either directly to the Department of Justice, which is Office of Civil Rights, which is the federal agency that enforces the ADA, or they can go to federal court directly. They can be represented by an attorney. They can be represented by an agency that provides services, or they can do it themselves. It's called pro se, that somebody can file a complaint on their own behalf. And what they then identify is the areas and elements that do not comply with the ADA, and demand that the ADA does not permit for financial remuneration to the plaintiff unless the case is filed with the Justice Department. The Justice Department can say, you have to fix these barriers, and then you have to pay the plaintiff $10,000 in punitive damages or whatever. Now, the other thing that I have seen happen very often, or fairly often, is that somebody gets injured because grab bar in the bathroom was loose and they fell off the toilet, or they built a ramp too steep, or there were cracks and divots and changes of level in the parking lot, and somebody fell and got injured. And
Right.
I tell people that the ADA is a day at the beach compared to personal injury.
Right.
Because when a personal injury lawyer reaches out, get your wallet out, get your checkbook
Right.
out,
Or
because that's when they get it. Yeah.
You could die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Falls are very, very serious the
Oh
older
my
you
God.
get.
Oh my God. Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, I have osteoporosis. I'm 70 years old, but I have osteoporosis. I am petrified of falling.
Mhm.
Petrified. Because what could be a simple trip and fall for a 30-year-old can be a broken hip that puts somebody in the hospital, and before you know it, they've died.
Right. Falling's kind of scary.
Yes, it is.
The
Falling is
older
very scary. Yes.
so my first apartment out of college, I swear to God, this relates to what we're talking about. I brought the median age down from that apartment to 82.
Okay.
It was just me at 22 with a bunch of seniors.
Yeah.
It
Okay.
wasn't a designated senior home or anything. That's just how it shook out. But I was walking to work one day and I slipped on the stairs because Wisconsin, you guys,
Yeah.
it's always snowing.
Right.
There
Right.
was a
Right.
patch of ice right at the bottom of the stairs, and I fell so hard. And Joan, I landed like this,
Oh my God.
just straight on my side. Granted, I know that this is
Oy, oy, oy.
an audio medium, but I landed basically head over feet on
Yeah.
my
Yeah. Yeah.
side, and I swear to God, I broke my collarbone, and my feet were all cut up. I couldn't move
Oh my
my
God.
arms higher than my shoulders at all without
Holy
being in so
moly.
much pain. I fell. I had to fall. It was bad. And I remember standing up and being like, if one of my neighbors fell, they would have died.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I was 22 and barely bounced back from it.
Did you break anything?
I don't think so. I think I might have broken my collarbone because that hurt for weeks. But
Oh my. Yeah, falling is fall and the reason why falling is so dangerous is that when somebody particularly breaks a hip, which very often happens very often, they wind up in a hospital, then they wind up in a rehab facility and they're immobile. And
right.
when you're immobile, particularly after having surgery, you
Mhm.
can get, they're on you like white on rice to do these breathing exercises because you will develop a pulmonary embolism and die,
Mhm.
or you'll get bed sores,
Right.
so it's very yes, it's very traumatic. So in any facility when there is, I always say to clients that I work with, this isn't just, ADA addresses safety too. We
Mhm.
talk about, fix those cracks in the sidewalk, make sure those handrails are stable in their fittings, make sure that the door doesn't close too fast, because, and I tell them specifically, if you have elevators, and I find this in a lot of senior facilities, they time the closing to be slower, or that the door stays open longer,
Okay, that makes sense.
simply because it takes longer for people to get into the elevator. And
Mhm.
even though the reopening device will trigger, it won't trigger sometimes until you get hit by the door.
Mhm.
So, there you go. Wet floors ADA requires firm, stable, and slip resistant. Well, you could have people who spill things. You could have people who have accidents. And again, this is something that is really something that staff have to pay absolute attention to.
Right. Even like I just went out to lunch yesterday with my coworkers and there was a big spill right by our table. And I
Uh-huh.
had to tell my coworker Becky, who shout out to
Yes,
Becky, to watch where she was stepping when she got down.
that's right.
Otherwise, again, she would have fell if she would have slipped, she would have cracked her head on the
Yeah,
table and it would have been
yeah,
a whole thing.
that's right.
Fortunately, she was okay. She did
And
not fall. But
fortunately, you watched out for her. So
yeah,
that's good. Yeah. Yeah.
thank you, Joan.
Yes. Yes. So, it really, like I said earlier, good design and aesthetics do not have to be mutually exclusive. It doesn't have to have a manual wheelchair flashing on the door.
Hmm.
And in fact, if the main entrance is accessible, meaning that it's level, if they have power assist doors, then they don't have to worry about the maneuvering clearance, because maneuvering clearance is usually necessary to be able to approach the door and open it. But I will tell you something, and I saw this recently actually at a community library. But when you think of the users at a community, I have a contract where I'm inspecting community libraries, and I love it because the children's library is like the happiest place in the world.
Hmm.
Okay. And they're very smart. What they do is they have power assisted doors
Right.
because moms are pushing strollers or holding on to kids or whatever. But this one place had the button to activate the door like 20 feet away. And I put in my report, it's not a requirement. It's not written into the standards that the only thing that's written into the standards about the button is that it's not mounted too high, and that there's clear floor space for the person to be able to do a side approach or a front approach. But I suggested to them that they move it closer because the door literally could close before the person gets to it. They
Hmm.
push the button and they got 20 feet, they got to go. And if they're walking with a walker, they're not walking fast. That's why they have a walker or a
Right.
cane. So, again, you have to you have to be creative. And one of the things I think that people have the biggest difficulty with ADA or implementing ADA is they say, well, where's it written that I have to do that? Well, there are a lot of things in the standards and the regulations that aren't specifically written, but they're addressed. And so, you have to kind of look to see, but then you also have to be creative and you have to open your mind to it. When it says a minimum, that's what it means. The minimum is the worst you should do.
Right.
So
that's a good way to put it.
It is. That's what it is. The minimum is the worst you should do. And if you go above the maximum, then you're putting it out of reach. So
Right.
if we want to translate minimum equals the worst you can do, and maximum is that you're putting it out of reach. And think in those kinds of terms. We have a new airport in Pittsburgh. Have you been to Pittsburgh lately?
I am not.
Okay,
I've only been to Pittsburgh via bus.
Okay, well, it's only 2 months old. So everybody's raving about this new $1 billion airport and blah, 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 blah. Well, when you arrive, we used to have a landside terminal and an airside terminal, and we had a train that took you in between. Okay. So now we have to have this newfangled airport. And you get dropped off. Everybody gets dropped off at the same door. And you go in and you take either an escalator or an elevator up to baggage. And you check your baggage in and you go through TSA, you go through security. And then there's a ramp that takes you up to where the gates are. The ADA regulations are that for every 30 feet of run, you have to have a 5x5 landing. It has 3 landings. So that means it's longer and higher than 90 feet.
Wow.
Okay. Now, I have been told I can't tell you how many people who are ambulatory, but they're older. Oh my God, it's so difficult. I mean, the first time I went there, I wrote a post on Facebook and said, this is wrong. And I didn't have my slope tool with me. Had I had my slope tool with me, I probably would have gotten arrested because I would have started measuring all the slopes. I can't imagine that the slopes exceed 8.33%. I could be wrong, but it's 90 freaking feet long. Now, if I had worked on that project, the first thing, aside from saying, we need to consider an alternative for this, the minimum I would have suggested to them was that they put benches on those landings so that if you have, if you can only walk 30 feet and it tires you out, then you can rest. But the thing that I'm the most concerned about is when older couples are traveling together. They, my father was 93 and he'd say, I don't need a wheelchair, I can walk, okay, which he couldn't. So there are people who are just unbelievably proud and would never say, I need a wheelchair. I tell them I need a wheelchair because I have vertigo. And when I'm walking too much, I can't walk a straight line. I mean, I would fail a field sobriety test and I don't drink. So I get the wheelchair service, which is fabulous. The people who push the wheelchairs, the attendant, every time I go, I say, how is, they said, it's horrible. So imagine for a moment a couple in their 70s or 80s that don't know about this and don't know about getting a wheelchair, and the spouse has to get a wheelchair and push their spouse up this 90-foot ramp.
Right.
So I don't know where their head was. And to be honest with you, and they can be mad at me or sue me or whatever, it's not very pretty either. So it's not a matter of aesthetics, but it was like, okay, it meets the minimum standards. Well, guess what? That's the worst you can do.
And then I know that we are running a little bit short on time. We might have to do a part 2 one of these
Okay,
days.
you got me.
But what do you think the future of accessible senior care facilities looks like?
Well, I think that the future is going to look like the people who are doing universal design. And really, universal design is kind of what I'm talking about, where you look beyond the minimum standards that you do, it's kind of like when they build what I would love to see, and I would love to see it in my lifetime so I can use it, is where they're building these communities that are pretty much self-contained, that they have a little community. People live in shared housing, and they've got retail, and they've got grocery stores, and they've got restaurants, and everything's accessible because the bottom and the ADA the ADA has a provision called visitability, meaning that somebody can get in and access the first floor of your house. So I'd like to see senior living, whether it's the first step out of your house or your apartment or your condominium, that first of all, you can bring enough things with you that still make you feel like you're home, and that it's easy living. It's aging in place. And aging in place, in my mind, aging in place does not just have to be staying in your own home and having it modified, because here in Pittsburgh, that's almost impossible.
Right.
I mean, we have old houses that are 4 squares, and they have what you've probably heard of this, the Pittsburgh toilet. The Pittsburgh toilet is in the basement, and it's a toilet. So, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law are 84 and 87. Their house has a Pittsburgh toilet in the basement and a bathroom on the second floor. So if you're on the first floor, forget it. You got to climb the steps either way. So that's I think that may be coming down the line, and I believe it will be coming down the line because I'm a baby boomer and we are not aging gracefully. No way. No way. We are not going to put up, we don't put up with what our parents put up with.
Right.
In medical care, I used to say, my mother would ask the doctor, and I'd ask the doctor questions, and my mother would say, "Don't he knows what I said, excuse me, I want to know what he's doing."
Right.
So if that's the case with us baby boomers, you guys coming behind us are not only going to demand it, you're going to demand it instantly.
Right.
And you're going to demand it through an app. So, but that's my dream. That is my dream, that it doesn't look like a senior facility, that it doesn't look like a hospital or a hospital room, that it's beautiful and accessible and not cost prohibitive. And that's the other thing. When you move into these, and we're going to have to do a part 2, Mackenna. When you move into these places that provide assisted living, they're astronomically expensive.
Right.
The decent ones here in Pittsburgh go from $7,000 to $15,000 a month. A month.
Oof.
Yeah. Yeah. So if not, then you wind up with county-owned nursing homes. So work hard, save a lot of money. Okay?
Trying my best, Joan.
Yes. That's my final advice.
But thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon.
Yes.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks,
you too. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Facilities in Focus podcast. Facilities in Focus is a product of the Facility Market, which houses FacilitiesNet, building operating management, facility maintenance decisions, and healthcare facilities today. Thank you to our sound and video editors, Paul Ellertson and Johnson Delapet. Thank you to Morgan Johnson for designing our logo. Thank you to Dan Welton, Dave Lubach, Dan Hounsell, Jeff Forden, Elena Myers, Corey Lallo, and everyone else at Trade Press Media Group. And of course, thank you Dalton, Holden, and Baby Girl. It's always a pleasure to be a part of your journey on the internet. For comments, or if you are interested in being a guest on Facilities in Focus, please email me, Mackenna, at fnpodcast@tradepress.com.